Okay, for those of you that are signed in, we are about to get started. Welcome to the second and final BrandUP webinar. We were super excited to talk to you guys during the open office hours this week. We appreciate all the great questions that you brought, the attention and the energy that you brought to the situation. We appreciate everybody that took the time to go through the first part of the webinar, do their homework, and bring their ideas to the table. Just as a reminder about this particular webinar, if you stick around to the end, we're going to give you access and share with you the second part of our tool set that we'll review today. And as promised, we're ramping up our offer from the first webinar. So make sure you stick around so you can claim your spot. All right, moving along. So I want to talk a little bit about where we've been and what's in store for today. Okay. Remember last week we covered the strategic foundations of campaign planning. We focused on the audience motivations, persona creation, and messaging development. And we started there because, as we mentioned before, every successful campaign relies on understanding the motivations and messaging of personas. Remember, this pyramid probably is starting to look a little bit familiar to you because last time we walked through the first two sections. Let's quickly just take a second to review some of the basics that we talked about last webinar. So we talked about covering the differences between audiences and personas and why that's so important. We talked about how you create personas, right? By grouping audiences by their motivations. We also talked about developing persona profiles by taking some of the common characteristics from our audience members that we can do a better job of developing our messaging around and our campaign implementation strategy, which we're actually going to talk about a little bit today, as you remember. Now, just a reminder, one common question that we hear all the time from clients, and it came up during the open office hours, is if I don't already know my personas well, how do I figure that out? It's a really common question. We hear it all the time, and I think it's a really good one too. And my simple response really is, don't be afraid to go out and ask people that you're trying to understand better, right? Stakeholder interviews and surveying are a really great way to continuously take temperature on a host of different things like messaging, motivations, your organizational vision, and things like that. So it's actually a really great engagement tactic as well. When you ask somebody about their opinion, that means you care about their ideas, their relationship to the organization. So bottom line is, don't be afraid to go out there and actually ask people what they think and what they're motivated by. The second thing that we talked about last week was we started to talk about messaging, right? We used our personas to develop a content tone, which basically created guidelines for our problem and solution statements. And we're going to talk more about how those problem and solution statements are really critically implemented today. You'll remember from that webinar that the problem and solution statements help capture the persona's attention or the audience member's attention, and then tells them why your organization's work actually matters in the context of the problem, okay? Remember, messaging is super tricky. It's not a stationary target, and you're likely not gonna get it 100% the first time. So you should always be testing messaging using tools like A/B testing on emails, A/B testing with web page content, in advertising, and other ways that you can measure results to see how people react to that. And as we mentioned before, surveys and focus groups or even stakeholder interviews can also be a great way to test that messaging. So you're starting to see a trend here about surveys and talking to people, stakeholder interviews. We're going to continue with that today. Okay, so thanks for holding with me there as we went through a quick review of what we already know. Let's take that foundation, and today we're actually going to build on that about how do we go about planning campaigns and how do we go about mapping those campaigns based on the actual personas. And for that, we're going to turn to Val. She's our expert on this, and she's going to walk us through it. Val's microphone may not be on.
Oops, sorry. Hi, everyone. So the next part of today, we're going to be talking about engagement mapping and campaign planning. We're going to take you through the process that we do with our clients all the time. What comes out the other side of this process will be a clear campaign plan that moves your audience members through what we call an engagement funnel. More simply put, over time, this process will move people from unaware that your organization even exists to potentially being loyal advocates of your work. It's important to realize that not everyone will reach the highest stage of engagement, but we definitely want that to be our goal. So what is an engagement funnel? Before jumping in, it's important to understand a key concept here. Let's talk about what an engagement funnel is. You may have also heard of the term sales funnel or marketing funnel before. The concepts are all similar. We like to use engagement in the nonprofit world because we want to develop loyal constituents, and we want to do that through the process of building long-term relationships with them. So an engagement funnel is really a theoretical journey that an audience member takes before making a purchase, or you can read donation. The funnel has different stages that all audience members go through and commonly consist of unaware, aware, consideration, making a decision to join, and ultimately retention, which you can read as becoming a loyal brand advocate. Here's a quick look at our actual engagement funnel. This represents the stages that any audience member would take when engaging with your organization. Our job as nonprofit professionals is to try and move them through the funnel toward the loyalty stage. Now, it's important to realize that not everyone is going to make it there, as I said. In fact, the visual of a funnel is used because the top, you're going to have a lot of people, and closer to the bottom, you'll have fewer, i.e. some people will fall off. We'll talk more about how and why this happens, but don't be scared of it. Not everyone is a perfect match for your organization, so you really don't need to force it. Sometimes this model is not totally linear either. For example, moving someone between consideration and loyalty can actually be seen more as a cyclical experience. Every time you approach an audience member with your next ask, they'll go through the consideration and decision stages all over again. Even the most loyal supporters will require a consideration and decision loop at some point. Think, for example, about a major donor that's donated consistently for the last 10 years. That sounds like real loyalty, right? Now, what if you're interested in having them serve on your organization's board? That definitely is a new ask, which will lead them back through a consideration to decision experience with you, just at a deeper level than they were before. So now that you understand the concept of an engagement funnel, let's jump into an actual campaign mapping exercise. So here we have mapping from unaware to advocate. Campaign mapping is critical when we're considering the life cycle of a persona. If you remember from our last webinar, a persona is an imaginary profile that allows us to plan communications materials based on what various audience members' motivations are. This matters because it will give us a detailed look at the way in which each of our personas can progress from the unaware stage to the loyal supporter stage. Knowing this can help us plan out the campaigns that will move them from one stage of their relationship with your organization to the next, which we'll do in our next exercise. As we said in the last webinar, if you don't understand what motivates personas or where to find them, you're not going to have much campaign success. You may remember our fictitious persona from last week named Sally. Sally was what we called a measuring stick. She was motivated by scalable solutions that you could measure. She was the mother of 2 kids and a very busy professional. Here's what mapping might look like to Sally. For the unaware stage, we're trying to find Sally. Where do Sallys congregate? Perhaps professional events or meetups, or you might find her on social media. She is active on Twitter professionally and Facebook personally, if you remember from last week. For Sally, we capture her attention with pithy information that sets out a clear problem statement. Remember, at this point in your relationship, you need to answer the question, why does Sally care? Oftentimes, the best way to address this is to think how this individual's life is affected on a day-to-day basis by your problem statement, and then frame your answer to her that way. Once Sally is aware, we need to establish legitimacy and value for her to consider taking an action. Value can mean a lot of different things, depending on what your organization does and what Sally wants from her interaction with you. Value could be things like resources that help her do her job better, thought leadership on topics she cares about, or expertise on a subject that she can use in her day-to-day life when talking with friends. It could also be something like access to certain individuals, ideas, or resources. It's really critical to think about how you can provide value to your personas because that establishes trust and is the foundation of stronger relationships. Try to go by the 80-20 rule. That means 80% of your marketing should be value you are providing to your audience members, and then 20% can be asking something from them. So now moving on to the consideration stage, you want to think about overcoming barriers. For Sally right now, what are her objections to taking an action? Maybe she just doesn't have enough time. Can you make it quicker and easier for her to do something? Maybe she doesn't yet feel like you're a legitimate organization. Perhaps she doesn't see a scalable solution in your business model. Whatever it is, you need to think about how to overcome these objections with the content that you deliver. Next, when you think about this stage of joining or making a decision, consider how you will begin nurturing your relationship with her. Nurturing starts by delivering value and a more customized experience. Since you're already starting to deliver value that you know that she's interested in, ask her what she cares about. What were her experiences like? Make it easy for her to support your work and share it with her friends and family. You may just acquire some more supporters along the way. The final stage here is loyalty. Once someone loves you, how can you help them do more to fulfill their passion for your work? Think of ways that you can engage them to be advocates and evangelists. Is it engaging in multiple ways? Can you ask them to get involved on a committee? Or is it something like raising money from friends? Asking for friends to support your organization for their birthday, for example. There are a lot of ways to do it. Think about how you can empower them to be a brand advocate for your work without them needing to recreate the wheel. So now moving on to campaign and project planning. If campaign mapping was the 30,000-foot view of an engagement plan, campaign planning takes us down closer to the 5,000-foot level, to more tangible implementation of your marketing strategy. When doing campaign planning, focus on one persona at a time and how you can move that persona 1 to 2 stages through the engagement funnel. So for example, from unaware to consideration or from aware to the joining stage. During this process, we'll start to actually talk about the messaging that you'll be using, the metrics you want to focus on for reporting, and one or many channels you'll implement for each campaign. Now let's take a look at this applied in the real world. You'll remember from our last webinar that we had this Root and Rebound project, and here's our case study, that we worked with over the exact same marketing framework to build a successful awareness campaign. Root and Rebound was working to scale their business model by launching an online training hub. The problem was that after they built it, there was just not enough awareness about who they were and the resources that they could provide. So the hub was a solution that nobody knew existed yet. We set out to change that through an education and awareness campaign. The campaign was called 48,000 Barriers, and the goal was to educate the public and build widespread awareness about the barriers that individuals face when leaving our justice system. By doing this, Root and Rebound would establish themselves as thought leaders and a trusted resource. In particular, Root and Rebound was interested in targeting caseworkers and institutions that could use the online hub to support their clients. After some discussion and consideration, Root and Rebound decided that one contact point for the personas they sought would be a social media campaign. The campaign set out to bring to light the basic need challenges formerly incarcerated people and their families faced, and then elevate their stories, illustrating how these are real people facing real issues and not faceless criminals. By educating the public about each individual barrier, like for example, difficulty in getting a driver's license and therefore a job, they were able to showcase caseworkers and institutions that they were experts in the field and in turn a trusted resource. So here's moving into our community connector, Marco. So we're going to talk about the next steps we took to begin this process. And first we defined the persona who we named Marco. We termed him a community connector. Marco is a social worker who works at a large anti-poverty nonprofit in downtown Los Angeles. The nonprofit works to get low-income clients, many of whom have records, access to basic needs, including housing, healthcare, and employment. He is 4 years into his career with 60 clients on his roster. Social work is his passion, and he's excited to help his clients in any way that he can. Considering our description of Marco, we worked together to develop a content tone that would fit his characteristics. So here's our content tone. Marco is struggling to provide the needed resources to his clients. The content tone is one of clear and directive information with clear tones of social justice and equity. He's looking to feel energized and that Root and Rebound has new and creative approaches to helping him and the people he serves. Now, where to find Marco? Social media, Facebook, in his office, professional listservs, just to name a few. Obviously, social media wasn't the only place to find him. However, it was a really easy location that we could scale quickly. As you can see here, we could find Marco in a lot of other locations, but most of them might require a face-to-face meeting. So let's take a look at what the campaign mapping looked like for Marco and this campaign. First, we came up with our project title, which, as you saw, we called 48,000 Barriers. Next, we identified which persona we were targeting. In this case, Marco, our community connector. Next, in this stage, we noted that we are moving Marco from unaware to consideration. Ultimately, we want Marco to learn about Root and Rebound, recognize their expertise, and then compel him to consider purchasing access to the hub. Next, we identified the content tone that would resonate most with him. So here, as we read, the content tone for Marco is one of clear and directive information with clear tones of social justice and equity. He's looking to feel energized to serve his clients better. Remember, always test your messaging. If you're uncertain, try a few different takes on the same idea and see which gets the most likes, tweets, and clicks. Also note that we're focused on building off of strategic work that we did in the earlier stages of this process. So hopefully you're seeing as we're going through each of these slides that all of this information is building on top of each other. Next, we build in a feedback loop. The only way to know if you're successful and where you can improve is by measuring and reporting. Many times we find that people don't like to measure because they're scared of failing. First and foremost, failing is not the worst thing in the world. Try to think of all of this as one big experiment, and the more you try and fail, the closer you are to success. Using the same bad tactics over and over again with no results is much worse than trying lots of things and shedding what doesn't work. In startup land, we call this failing fast. Plus, if you're measuring how you're failing, at least you know what is not working and why, so you can try something new. So for campaign planning, make sure that you note the specific outputs that you'll measure throughout the campaign. Finally, we identified the channel where we were going to concentrate this campaign, which was social media. It's important to note here that campaigns can take place across multiple channels and are often more effective when they do. We'll talk more about this in the next section, but it's worth pointing out right now since this example only uses one channel just for the purposes of simplification. So now some tips for content planning. Now that we've talked about the planning process, let's start to think about content for your campaign. Here's some tips on generating successful campaign content. First, can you leverage anything that you already have? Meaning, if you have an existing graphic, video, or written piece, can you use it again? No need to recreate the wheel if that particular content works for your new campaign. That being said, be careful not to reuse content for the same personas across different campaigns too often. Then it will get really stale quickly. Second, use the data you have to make decisions. Are there types of content that you know have been successful in the past with people that are already engaged? If so, use it. Again, it's important to note that in order to know this, you need to be measuring your work, taking notes, recording things along the way. Third, if you do need to create new content, be realistic about the time and resources it will take. If your staff has low bandwidth, build in some padding or think about hiring some additional help, even if it's just to get your templates in place. Try to be realistic about your timeline and realize things always take longer than you expect that they will. Finally, are there costs associated with the campaign? Make sure to budget for outside consultants if you need them, advertising, printing, all those kinds of things. So now I'm going to hand it back to Andrew to talk to you about campaign implementation.
Okay, thanks, Val. Now that we understand how to plan the campaign, let's actually talk about how we implement it, okay? First, we're going to start to talk about how to think about and distribute your message to target personas. We're going to start to think about the tools that we're going to use for that distribution of content based on the channels that you're using in your campaign or the channels that we targeted in that campaign planning process. It's also important to start to think in terms of communicating across multiple channels if you can. Multi-channel marketing has actually proven by research to be far more effective than using just a single channel. And we're going to dig into that a little bit more. Okay. Finally, today, we're going to talk about putting all of this on autopilot. Specifically, we're going to talk about how to acquire new supporters with less staff time. And we're going to actually give you a formula for moving individuals through the engagement funnel automatically using marketing automation. All right. So before we do that, I just want to talk a little bit about multi-channel marketing and what it is. So over the last 10 or 15 years, there's been a huge push for multi-channel marketing. And as Val said, sometimes that's called omni-channel marketing. The main reason for this is that it really works. There are reams of statistics out there about how effective multi-channel marketing actually can be. And you can see here on this slide, I recently read this in an article by Mobile Cause that 50% more donors respond to a direct mail when they're receiving the same call to action across multiple channels. So you may be asking yourself, why does this even matter? Who cares, right? To me, the fact that you can change user behavior dramatically by simply connecting to them across multiple channels is really an astounding thing. And in the same survey or in the same article, Mobile Cause noted that based on the demographics of the user, there are significant differences in how the users prefer to be communicated with, right? So some people liked direct mail and social media as kind of the mixture of communication. Some people liked direct mail and phone. Others liked a combination that also included email. This is another great reminder to us that you need to get to know your persona, okay? Using surveys and interviews, people get to know a lot more about who you're communicating with and how you communicate with them. Okay, so we're going to talk a little bit more about how to build this into your onboarding process later on with new constituents so that you can increase the retention rate of new constituents. But it's really important to note here that multi-channel marketing is really powerful, and we should start to think about that. So now that we understand why multi-channel marketing is important, let's talk about what to keep in mind when you're running a multi-channel marketing campaign. When you're thinking about content distribution, remember that our decisions are based around the personas that we're communicating with. If you're targeting a 40-year-old lawyer, you probably don't want to use something like Snapchat as your main marketing channel, right? Now, this is obviously hyperbole, but I'm trying to make the point that being thoughtful about when you're thinking about content delivery is really important. And you saw that in the Root and Rebound case study that we talked about earlier. So let's dig in a little bit more about some of the things that you should be thinking about. First, what is the context of your campaign, right? If you find your targeted persona at marketing events or at tabling events, do you think that the video or a video is really the right content format? And actually, it might be, but remember, at tabling events, most people won't be able to hear sound. So make sure that you choose a video that's compelling without sound. You might want to use a video to draw people in, but make sure that you know that that's not going to be the main way that you communicate with them. Again, think about your content in context of how you're going to be using it and where you're encountering your persona. Second, it's really important when you're using multiple channels that your campaign keeps things consistent. Use the same campaign tagline. If you're using a hashtag, use that. And make sure that the artwork is really consistent, for instance. As users see these elements across multiple channels, it's going to bring continuity to the campaign. And remember that studies have shown most consumers need to see things at least 7 times before they remember it. That is a lot. And in your case, not everybody's going to require that many touches depending on where they are in your engagement funnel. But the more that they see it, the more powerful it becomes to them. So remember that multi-channel marketing really is powerful and you need to have that consistency. Third is that your work is most efficiently done in bursts, and this can be where automation comes into play. For instance, Don't write out one tweet every day and post it, okay? Instead, oftentimes when we're doing work like this, we'll write out all the tweets for an entire campaign and then schedule them out. It's far more efficient to do it that way. It's going to be more efficient to use your time that way. And as I said before, you can leverage automation technology to do a lot more and be more efficient with your staff time. And then finally, as we've said over and over again, build in feedback loops that will allow you to assess which channels are producing the most success for your campaigns. And this is going to allow you to continue to refine your strategies as well as finding those particular personas. You can use tools like Google Analytics UTM tags, or you can use tools like Bitly to track the number of conversions that a particular channel is providing for you. If you are using something like print for your campaign, it might be worth using a vanity URL when you send somebody from the print piece to your website so that you can track how many people and how effectively that mail piece is actually driving people to that website. Likewise, with a print campaign, and a lot of people are probably already doing this, if it requires a response by mail, make sure that you put some kind of response envelope that has a code on it so that you can make sure to track the success of that campaign. It all goes back to the importance of tracking, as we've said over and over again, so that you can continue to improve, continue to test, and make sure that the outcomes are working for you. And it's really important to realize here, guys, that you're never going to get 100% accuracy on this type of tracking and measuring, but it shouldn't stop you from actually trying to do it, because you're going to find a lot of really important information in there as you move forward. Okay. One thing that's been a side effect of multi-channel marketing is that it relies on a number of different technologies. So we generally break these technologies into 4 different buckets. Today, there seems to be an infinite number of these systems out there that provide one or many of these buckets that we're listing on this slide. So don't feel like each bucket necessarily represents a single system or a single technology. But it's really important, we think, to have all of these buckets represented in your marketing technology stack. When you're selecting a technology, it's really important to have a clear understanding of what your needs are, how you use it, the type of staff members that you're going to have available to manage it. There are lots of different consultants out there that can walk you through this process to make sure that those tools are right for you. So make sure that you're doing your due diligence when you're selecting your technology. So number one, first and foremost, you have to have a constituent relationship management system, or what's commonly referred to as a CRM. This should basically serve as your database of record. All other data should flow into this database. It's absolutely critical to have. So some examples of CRMs include things like Salesforce, Razor's Edge, Blue State Digital, Engaging Networks. There are a ton of options out there. So if you don't have one already, you really should. Please, please, please do not be running your marketing off of Excel spreadsheets. We see it too much and it just hurts to see. The second bucket deals with content distribution. So things like your website, email service providers like MailChimp, social media management tools like Hootsuite, video providers like YouTube or Vimeo. We recommend looking for tools that are free or cheap in this area. There are a lot of them out there, but it's really critical that these tools integrate with your CRM so that you can track your activity. And most importantly, these tools should allow you to schedule content publications and hopefully track metrics for you. The third bucket here is a platform that manages transactions. A lot of these actually are built into CRMs now. So just note that transaction platforms can be a big part of your CRM as well. This can be things like donation platforms, event ticketing platforms, or even membership platforms, for example. And as I said before, a lot of times these are already part of your CRM, but if they're not, it's absolutely critical for this to integrate and talk and play nicely with your CRM so that these transactions are automatically being brought into your CRM. It's a terrible, terrible thing to waste staff time or volunteer time on doing manual data entry. And it's also a terrible thing to waste time on doing CSV imports into your CRM. It's really a good idea to make sure that these integrate well. The fourth and final bucket here is measuring and reporting. And we've talked about this a lot. We've talked about the importance of how measuring is absolutely critical to the success of your future campaigns. If you're not measuring, you're not getting better. You're not seeing the problems and you're not solving those problems. Measuring can come from tools like Hootsuite, Google Analytics. A lot of CRMs also are going to provide you pretty robust reporting. So this may sound obvious, but it's a really important part of measuring that you're creating useful reports. If you're aggregating data from different platforms, you should have one reporting dashboard that can create useful reports. I personally really like Google Data Studios as it easily integrates with a lot of different platforms and makes really easy to read reports, but there are a lot of different dashboards out there where you can aggregate your data together and create really useful reports. For any of these buckets, it's always important or a huge bonus if the process or if that technology can be automated in some way. So as I said before, for a CRM, automation might look like an integration with another platform to automatically bring in data into your database without manually doing data entry. For a distribution platform, that might look like scheduling, posting of content, or automating something based on the behavior of a user, like a click on an email or maybe a visit to your website, something like that. From a measuring perspective, you can automate reports being sent to any number of people on your team or throughout your organization so that they can see how the campaign is progressing and they can see how the work is actually developing outputs for them. Automation, as we said before, saves your team time on really simple processes and saves bandwidth that can be spent on really important things that don't need to be done manually over and over again, okay? Over the last 10 years, marketing automation has become critical to part of the successful marketing. So let's walk through an example automated campaign that we think every nonprofit should have at a minimum. It's called, and some of you may have heard it before, a welcome series or a welcome campaign. So a welcome series is a really simple marketing campaign that is commonly used with email, but it doesn't always have to be. In fact, if you can make your welcome series multi-channel, as we said before, this is going to be even more effective in terms of driving action. But note that it's a bit more complicated to implement a multi-channel welcome series. However, if you're able to do it through your CRM or other technologies, it is super, super powerful. Welcome series have been shown to drastically increase the retention of new constituents that become aware or engaged with your organization. And you might be asking yourself, why does that even matter? Why should I care about retention of new constituents? And basically, my response is that acquiring new constituents isn't just hard, but it's actually quite expensive. And depending on the methodology that you're using for acquisition, you know that costs for acquisition can be really high. By increasing the retention rate of those new constituents, you can drastically reduce those costs by keeping more of your constituents that you newly acquired around and building value on those people. So with the spread of email marketing automation, welcome series have actually become really common and an easy thing that you can build directly into the work that you're doing. From an engagement perspective, a welcome series lays the groundwork for future communications and helps introduce the constituent to who your organization is, as well as the reason that your organization exists in the first place. Remember, we're kind of going back to that same idea of problem and solution statements. So I'm really glad that we took the time in the first webinar to understand that and to build those out. As you continue to deliver engaging content to this new constituent, you're implicitly gaining trust and permission to continue communications with them. All right. This trust is really, really, really critical as you continue to move that constituent through your engagement funnel towards the stage of loyalty. Then finally, one of the reasons that welcome series are common is that they're pretty simple to put in place and you can run it year-round on autopilot. And this is going to free up your team for more bandwidth to do other important things. So a bonus to all of this is that there are actually platforms out there that will run these email welcome series for free. So for instance, MailChimp allows you to set these up, these automated email sequences for free on their free account level. So if you don't already have some technologies that are doing this for you, it might be time to start taking a look around. Okay. So now that we understand the goals of a welcome series and how it works, let's talk a little bit about what you're trying to accomplish, or the 4 things that you're trying to accomplish with a welcome series. First, as we mentioned before, we want to orient and educate our constituents so they know who we are and why they should care about what we're doing. Okay. Secondly, we're working to gain trust and permission to keep the lines of communication open. We'll talk about that a bit in a second on how we can encourage that and foster that trust. Third, take the time to learn about your constituents. If you pay, this is going to pay off a lot later as you start to build that relationship, and it's going to help you deliver more customized experience to them. And then finally, the welcome series moves the constituents to the next stage of engagement. So let's dig in a little bit more detail on each of those different goals. As I mentioned, orientation and education are critical to starting a relationship. This is about that elevator pitch that we talked about before. When you're thinking about how to do this, go back again. We're saying it over and over again here. Go back to your problem and solution statements to make your case for existence. We're basically making that elevator pitch, but we're not in an elevator, right? We're doing it through email. So right off the bat, we need to answer the questions. Why should that constituent care? And how does this affect that constituent on a regular basis? Then you can move to your organization and how you're being a leader in addressing those issues or those problems, and how you're different than other organizations that might be in the space. What makes you special? Okay. Lastly, give somebody a really clear picture on how they might engage in the future. You don't want to ask them yet, but give them a chance or a taste of how other people are engaged with your organization. If someone is interested in your nonprofit, there's a high likelihood that they're looking to get engaged in some way. Okay, so number 2, we're looking to establish permission and trust. Most often, we're doing this by delivering value to the new constituent, as Val mentioned before. Think about what value you can provide that will keep these constituents interested, right? Today, we mentioned value can come from things like resources, thought leadership, education materials, or access to people or reports that you might not have otherwise. If you're able to provide that value to constituents, they'll look forward to hearing from you, and you're inherently gaining permission to continue to communicate with them. If you're not providing value, your messages are rarely going to get opened, and you're going to see that people start to drop off. Make sure that you're setting a precedent up front that you'll continue to provide what that constituent wants, right? Remember Val's rule of 80-20. We want to provide value 80% of the time, and 20% of the time we're going to ask something from them. Don't be afraid to lose people for the right reasons, right? You should definitely be afraid to lose people for the wrong reasons, but don't be afraid to lose them for the right reasons. If someone is not opening your emails or hasn't engaged with you in some way for more than a year, some people might say longer, it may not be that there's a good fit there anymore. And one of the last things, you might want to try one last time to recapture their interest, but don't beg them to stick around, because ultimately that's going to cost you resources and staff time and potentially in money. It's okay to have unengaged people fall off, and it's not uncommon to see that there's churn in your constituent database, right? In fact, I read an article just the other day. CauseVox reported that on average, only 43% of donors were retained by their organizations in 2017. Now, to me, this is a bit alarming and does not seem like it should be a number that is what you shoot for. Because imagine the cost that it takes to basically acquire half of your donor database over again each year, and over and over and over again. I mean, that's a lot of cost. That's really terrible. Your goal should definitely be to be way better than 43% in terms of retaining your donors. But it gives you an idea of that churn does happen, and that preventing churn can actually give you a lot of benefit as well as save you a lot of money. Okay, so again, a little bit of churn is natural, but if you see a mass drop off in engagement, it's time to start running some surveys, doing some interviews, and asking some questions about why are people not engaging anymore. So third, as we've been saying over and over, this is a golden opportunity to learn more about your new constituent. Not only will the constituent appreciate that you care, but you can actually use this information to create a better experience for them going through the rest of the welcome series, and it's information that you can build a stronger relationship on going forward. So take some time during the welcome series to actually survey people. It doesn't need to be more than 2 or 3 questions. Just make sure that you're gathering some information from them. So some good questions that are going to help you move forward in context of their interest would be like, how do you prefer to be communicated with, right? Remember that we found at Mobile Cause found that people have preferences with the channels that they want to communicate with you by. What are the areas of our work that you feel are most critical? What motivated you to get involved in the first place, right? So these are things where we can get a baseline of information about this individual, and we can actually use that information to start to kind of categorize them or move them into these different personas that we have. You can also learn about users by observing their behaviors, all right? Most CRMs are going to track where users clicked. They may also track what pages on your website that they've been to. So leverage this power to help you use that information and build out your personas, customize that experience accordingly. You're going to have a lot more success if you're able to actually customize that user's experience. Finally, as we said before, ask them to take the next step and move them along that engagement funnel. So we hear from people all the time, if I ask them too early, I'm going to scare them off. So I don't want to ask them at all. And basically my response is that if you're asking them the wrong thing, this is probably going to be true. But if you're asking the right person, the right thing at the right time, you're going to have a lot of success in terms of getting people to take action, right? You've already spent the time in this welcome series to ask them what their preferences are. We should know what motivates them. Make the ask in context of those particular preferences. So the last thing here to think about is make the yes easy for them. If you're asking too much, you're going to get a lot of no's. So how do we go about the process of making yes easy, right? Make sure that what you're asking them actually provides value to them, right? So for instance, what if we were thinking about asking somebody something in the welcome series like, our executive director interviews thought leaders in our industry each week on our Facebook page, and we post those videos. Here's a link to a recent interview that we did there. Take a look. And while you're there, follow us so that you can see the rest of the great interviews that we do each week delivered directly to you, right? So first, this is a really low risk ask. You're only asking people to go to your Facebook page and potentially like you, right? Secondly, they're actually getting value out of this. So this is something that if you know this person is interested in thought leadership, or you know that they're interested in some of the work that you're doing in particular topics, you can essentially make this experience better for them by giving them value upfront around the things that they prefer. Don't go too far too fast, all right? This is where people tend to fall off. Build a rock solid relationship before you ask too much of this new constituent. So now that we've sort of broken down those goals of the email series or this welcome series, let's talk a bit more about what this actually looks like in terms of practice. So first off, most people get intimidated by a welcome series because they think it needs to be super complex and really long. Keep it simple at first, okay? We really just want to get things moving here, and you can refine it over time. Shoot for about 4 to 5 emails that are automatically sent over a 4 to 6 week period. As we mentioned before, include an ask that provides value to them at the end of the email series. And sometimes I've also heard people that have tested their email series and they've moved the ask up further in it, and they said that that has been successful as well. So make sure that later on, after you've built out this initial series, you start to test the different things. Okay, lastly, if you can get the user to communicate with you over multiple channels, that's a huge benefit. As we saw before, communicating with constituents over multiple channels greatly increases your success rate down the line when you might have a larger ask from them, okay? At Rootid, we really like to make sure that that multi-channel ask is kind of built into the welcome series because we think it sets up the bigger ask so well down the line. Let's look at an actual example of how those emails progress, right? This is a simple formula that we've used before. And again, this is a starting point. It doesn't necessarily mean that it's going to work perfectly for you, but it's a great place to start. So first off, the first email always says thank you. You immediately want to say thank you as soon as they sign up. You also want to make sure that you reinforce the decision that they've made of why they signed up. What is the value that they're going to get as a result of signing up? It's also really important to set expectations about how often you're going to be communicating with them and how you're going to be doing it, okay? The second email should probably come soon after that, and it should really set up the impact that you have at your organization and what you've done to date. And it should set out a vision for where you're going, what your impact is going to be in the future, and how you're going to do that. So basically, go back to this concept of using your elevator pitch, all right? A great content choice here can often be a video of your executive director or a leader in your organization kind of laying out the vision for where you're going. Remember that you really want to focus on the why, right? Because that's how the person is going to get behind you. Why do you exist? Why does the work that you do matter? And once that individual can get behind the why, then it's going to be much easier to start to talk to them about the how, okay? Third, ask them about their interests. And this goes back to what we talked about before. If you want to make your welcome series more complex, you can make the final 2 emails based on the results of this quick survey that you're doing with them. But as we talked about before, this is a great opportunity to communicate with them that you respect them as constituents. You respect their opinions and their preferences, and you want to make sure that their experience with you is based around that. We're trying to ensure that you send content to them that actually matters. So surveys are going to help you do that. Fourth, tell a story, tell an impact story. If you have received data about the constituents' interest in your work, try to send a story specific to their interests, all right? So this is maybe a bit more of a 2.0 version of your welcome series, but if you know that the constituent loves your work saving the polar bears, send them a story about your work saving the polar bears and what you're doing in order to save those polar bears. They're going to definitely open that email and they're definitely going to consume that content. And again, they're going to get value out of that. And then lastly, make the ask, right? We talked about that before. Keep it small. And if you have the capability to do it, customize the ask to target their interests. Again, if you know that they're interested in your work with polar bears, make the ask focused on something to do with polar bears. If you don't have that data, or if you're just starting out and you want to keep it simple, keep the ask pretty general, okay? All right, some things to think about when we're starting with automation if you haven't already dug into the world of automation. There are different ways to run automations. You can run based on time between emails. You can run automations based on user behavior or a combination of both in some capacity. When you're starting out, try to keep it really simple. So I would just recommend using time, right? So time in between an email series. As you get more comfortable with the technology, start using the behaviors when users click or if they visit your website. That's going to trigger different things, okay? So again, for the purposes of getting started, I'd recommend keeping it really simple and just using time span to run your automations. Secondly, I'm starting to sound like a broken record here, but you need to build in some way to test your content. There's no perfect welcome series right out of the box. Test your different messages, test subject lines, test email content. As I said before, test the order of the different emails and see if there are different outcomes based on the way that you actually deliver those emails. But don't let this paralyze you from getting started in the first place. Make sure you build in ways that you can measure the success of your welcome series. Otherwise, you're never going to make it better, okay? And then lastly, a few things that we've mentioned before. Make sure that the marketing technology integrates with each other, right? In particular, you want to be able to store all of the data from this process in your CRM if you can. When you're looking or taking a look out at the world with marketing technologies, it's best if all of the platforms that you're using play nicely together so that you can make sure that you're getting feedback from those processes. Okay. I want you to take a really deep breath here because I know that over the last 2 weeks, We've consumed a lot of content. We've thought about a lot of different ideas. And at this point, you probably feel like you drank through a fire hose. I don't want you to feel paralyzed by the amount of content or ideas that we just ingested in the last 2 weeks. There's a lot to deal with here if you've never heard of it before. So we hear from nonprofits all the time that, they go through these big strategy and communications pushes, and then they come out the other side and they kind of get this implementation paralysis. All right. Here are some tips that we've used before to help make sure that the process is moving forward. All right. First, take some time to reflect on the process as a team. Make sure that you all agree on the priorities of your communications strategy in context of what you're trying to achieve as an organization. Okay. Secondly, you need a point person for this stuff. That doesn't mean that that person needs to do all of the work. And in fact, I recommend that they don't. But you need to have somebody that keeps tabs on the scope of work, manages the project schedule, and kind of outlines the deliverables that are needed. So make sure that somebody is driving the bus. Third, get your leadership team involved. It's really important, and it's easier to implement an organization-wide communication strategy if you have buy-in from organizational leaders. Okay, don't go kicking and screaming into a meeting or into their offices telling them what to do. You really need to take the time to listen and ask them about where their teams are struggling. What are some of the challenges that they face in terms of meeting their goals? And talk to them about how this framework or how your comms team can help alleviate some of those challenges. Okay, lastly, as we've said a couple of times now, you need to build in accountability and measurement into this process. This isn't just going to be a project schedule, but you also need to write down the metrics that will be the key to success or failure so that you can measure where you are. It's not only going to motivate everyone involved because there's transparency about what's going on, but it's going to allow you to assess that work later on, as we said. Measure, measure, measure. Okay. So hopefully those are some helpful tips on how to avoid implementation paralysis. So in light of keeping the momentum, what are some of the next steps that you can take today in order to continue this momentum? So first off, download the second part of our tool set. We're going to send that over to you after this presentation. Number two, from a campaign mapping perspective, think about a campaign and start to map out at least one persona, okay? And then thirdly here, plan at least one campaign. Maybe it's a welcome series. Maybe as we get closer to the end of the year, you start to think about a different campaign that might be for your end of year giving season, or maybe it's some sort of campaign this fall. Fourth, think about automation. This isn't something where you should stop the presses and stop doing what you're already doing, but take a look at some of the tools that you already have. Are there automation processes that are built in there that you could maybe be taking advantage of? Are there different automation processes that maybe you don't have and you want to start doing research around? So think about different ways that you can build automation into your workflow and into your processes. And then finally, again, we want you to sign up for Rootid's special offer. As I mentioned at the start of this webinar, we're sweetening that offer from the first webinar, and we're going to have it a little bit more customized to your needs, okay? We totally understand that if you've gone through this for the first time, this process is a little bit confusing and it's a lot to take in. So we want to provide our help and lend our expertise. And so for the next 5 minutes, you can sign up for a free 30-minute consultation with our team. During that call, we're open to review either the work that we talked about through this webinar, or we can talk more holistically about your organizational goals and how the strategy or your communication strategy can fit into that in general. We can help shed a little bit of light on where we might see some opportunities for your organization and different areas where you might be able to focus your efforts going forward. If you don't feel you're ready for this, that's okay. Again, this isn't for everybody. If you or your staff doesn't have the bandwidth to take on this strategic work in the next few months, then we recommend waiting until you have the time to really devote to this process, devote to this framework, and think through it more and more, okay? But if you are working on this strategic communications and you do think that it's a really important priority for your team in the near future, then we definitely want to lend our expertise, okay? We want to help you get started, and we want to be help point you in the right direction to make sure that where you're going is going to be successful. So take a second, sign up now. If you click on the register now button, you're going to get taken directly to a scheduling screen where you can find a time that works for you. And then finally, guys, first off, I just want to say thank you so much for your time, for your attention, your interest in this framework and in the work that we're doing. As I mentioned before, if you're looking for more resources or if you have questions, check us out on social media, on Twitter or Facebook. We're always posting new ideas and tactics out there, so take a look there. And finally, as I said, we really appreciate your time, your energy, the ideas that you brought to the open office sessions, and we're really looking forward to doing more specific work around your organization in our one-on-one session with you. So thank you guys so much, and have a great rest of the week.